Welcome to That Weekend Feeling with Darren Mann.
That weekend feeling today, catching up with Professor Jonathan Jansen. This week in his Life Lessons newspaper column, he took aim at education policy pronouncements recently made by the government. One involves downgrading some universities, the other, the introduction of African languages in our schools. Prof, you're not happy with these policy pronouncements. What's going on? Good morning.
Hi, I'm a student of policy, and what I discovered over the years that governments develop policies for two reasons. One is sometimes to implement them, but most often to show off. That is to what we in academics call, symbolism. It's intended to give the impression that you're going to do something without actually doing anything about it. And I'm afraid in these two cases, these are not policy announcements intended to change anything. It is intended to make the government look good.
So it's good politics.
It's very good politics, and it buys you time, and it builds up your credibility or your legitimacy with your some of your stakeholders. But it is important to see through these attempts to basically mislead the people.
If we could look at the two policy pronouncements, and the first one of those, the announcement of a restructuring proposal for higher education. What does that mean in practice? What are they trying to do or say that they're trying to do?
Okay, what they're trying to do in effect is to give a pathway into higher education for those kinds of institutions that are out of it at the moment, like nursing colleges, like agricultural colleges, like private, colleges that want to do higher ed. But what they say in the process is, guess what? Here's our macho response to the crisis in universities. We will downgrade universities if they don't perform to a standard that we set. Now, that, of course, is absolute nonsense. They will never do that. And the reason I said in the column is because our universities are creatures of apartheid. They were set up in, and your province, the Eastern Cape, is a very good example. You have a university on each side of the Kai, right?
Yes.
Can you imagine what would happen to any minister if she or he decides to close down Walter Sisulu or close down Fort Hare? Both universities which have been in trouble all the time, right? The reason they can't do that is because the ethnic politics there, the ANC-related ethnic politics, is so powerful that you would rather continue with the empty shell. By the way, when Kader Asmal was Minister of Education, he and his department tried to close down what was then called the University of the Transkei. Now Walter Sisulu with the merger. And you know what Nelson Mandela told him, who was the president at the time? Nelson Mandela says, if you touch UNITRA, which was an empty shell, there was nothing going on there. If you touch it, I will lead a march on Tata. So, unfortunately, politics has the final say in regards to policy decisions, even when it is so obviously the right thing to do, which is to close or downgrade particular universities.
Now, the other policy announcement was, as far as school subjects from grade 4 onwards go, as I understand, subjects will be taught in African languages. Is this practical?
Well, it's supposed to be taught in African languages from grades 1 through 3, right? And then in grades 4, there's supposed to be a shift to English. The reason it hardly happens as planned in the foundation phase, that is in the first 4 years, is that the teachers don't have the competence and the confidence to teach in the African languages, all right? Imagine from grade 4 to matric teaching the different subjects, mathematics, physical science, history, geography, and so on, in the African languages. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it is wonderful to give recognition to neglected languages. But I'm also a realist. I also say, where the hell are these teachers going to come from? We hardly have graduates from teacher education faculties at our universities in the African language. We hardly have any. The other problem, as I said in the column, is the problem isn't languages. In other words, the department would like you to believe that if only we taught in isiZulu or Setswana and so on, the language, the performance of children academically will improve. That's nonsense. We have good research to show that regardless of the language of teaching, of instruction, students still fail. Why? Because you don't have enough teachers who A, know the subject, and B, know it well enough to teach it competently. So the problem is not languages. And even if it was simply a case of cultural restoration for neglected languages, which again I think is a good thing, as a practical matter, it will not improve the performance of children on the one hand. On the other hand, we don't have enough teachers to do that anyway in our public schools.
Quoting from your column, you say, "Show me one minister in the cabinet whose child or grandchild is in a school where the African languages are taught through high school." How many are there?
Zero. And there's the hypocrisy right there, right?
Yeah.
So, and that explains my criticism that this is showboating, this is showcasing a particular political position, which you yourself will not subject your children to.
Prof, and where do we go from here? These education policy pronouncements, are they law yet? Are they likely to become law? Or is it just the grandstanding that you mentioned at the outro?
Well, the one that on languages, it will never become, a formal policy. It might, even if it exists on paper, it's never going to ever see the light of day in practice. They might pilot it in schools in the Eastern Cape, for example, but it cannot be rolled out into all the provinces in all the official languages. So forget about that. On the question of the downgrading of universities as part of the higher ed proposal, again, that might appear on paper, but it will never happen in practice. Think of it, Fort Hare, which I think, by the way, is working very hard to get out of our hole. It has a great leadership team at the moment under Professor Mshlungu. So, but they, as you know, they constantly in the courts, constantly having interference by some of those criminals in ANC governance. But you can't shut them down. I mean, your premier was implicated, right, or is implicated in a degree scandal at Fort Hare, your Eastern Cape premier, because he was registered knowingly for a degree in which he did not have the qualifications to be registered. You think they're going to shut down Fort Hare because of that? They can't even shut him down. So, no, and that was my whole point, let's just be real here, let's just be honest, but especially in provinces like the Eastern Cape, where the ANC politics is really dependent on a large province like that. Look at KZN, KwaZulu-Natal. Here is a woman who has been charged with a long list, of potential criminal activities, and yet she's put forward by the ANC for a major leadership position in the province. My point simply is there's a reason that in French and for the French, the word politics and policy is the same word.
Professor Jonathan Jansen, it's been a pleasure as always. Have a good day. We appreciate you joining us on That Weekend Feeling today.
Thank you.
That was That Weekend Feeling with Darren Mann.